Okay, for our second part today, we're going to be looking at the task of finding a linear model. One of probably the most important parts of studying math is doing something like this, where we actually use the slopes and y-intercepts and things that we're learning about lines to do something that is actually real. Okay, something that's useful, something that people would actually do in a job situation. Okay? And one of the simplest types of equations is a linear equation, a line, and that's what we start with generally. It's the simplest type. Okay. But bottom line is, if in this particular case, it says America's disposable income is in trillions of dollars, is given in the table. On the next slide, we'll look at that in a minute. Okay. And it says write a linear equation for Americans' disposable income. Okay. Y in terms of years x using these 2 points. Okay. Now, if we do that, then what's going to happen is we're going to recognize that we have 2 points here that we can do like we did previous. We can find the slope, okay? And we can also write it in point slope form, and then we can put it really in any form we want to. And if we wanted to graph it, we could solve it for y, okay, and so on. But what it will boil down to is we'll end up with an equation, okay, that instead of just being an equation for an equation's sake, it's an equation that actually means something. Okay? So we can use that equation to make predictions about maybe the future or what it might have been in the past. Okay? Or in this case, we use 2002 and 2003. Maybe we can use it to predict what the situation was in 2003, somewhere in the middle of those two. Okay? And that's ultimately what we're going to get back to here when we look at these questions. Okay? Now, before we do that, let's go ahead and look at the table that was given. Okay? So this would be a typical problem where we're given some data. Okay? And we can see that it appears that the amount is increasing as we go from year to year. Okay, we have data for 6 different years here. And the first thing I want to recognize is that on the computer screen they show here, they have a scatter plot of that data. Okay? So what we're going to do first is, how did they get that scatter plot? We're going to go ahead and learn how to do that right now. Okay? So if you take your graphing calculator and you hit Stat, which is right down here below the delete button, and hit Edit, you're going to have list 1 and list 2. Okay. All right. And in list 1 and list 2, you're going to put your years for the x and your amounts for the y's. Now, I have stuff in there already, so I'm going to hit delete and delete those out of there right now. Okay. And then I'm also going to put the years in a particular way. So here, I want you to watch very carefully what I do when I put the years in. Okay. Instead of typing in 2002, okay, with that being my starting year for this experiment, I'm going to call that year 0. Okay, the starting year is always going to be my year 0. And then we're going to go, notice it goes by 1, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, what these represent, instead of the actual years, they represent the years after 2002. So 2002, 1 year later would be 2003, 2 years later would be 2004. 5 years later it would be 2007, and so on. And that way we're not using these giant numbers that are actual years. Okay. And then if we go 8, 8.4, 8.9, 9.3, 9.9, and then 10.4. Okay. And I'm going to do this a little bit quickly, so when we get done, if you're not caught up with me, we can look at it together in a few minutes. And then what we're going to look at next is, this time we do want to go to stat plot and turn the stat plot on, because this is how we draw the actual scatter plot of these points. Should be on the very first one when you go in there. X list and Y list should be list 1 and list 2 where your data is. I always keep my mark on the little box because it's easiest to see. Okay. And then from there, we're going to go to window. Now, remember, I put in my x direction, I put 0 through 5. So what I need to have in my window is something smaller than the smallest that I put in, something bigger than the biggest. So I'm going to go, I'll say -2 and 7. So remember, I put in 0 through 5 are my numbers I put in the x. Same thing here, I need something in the y direction, smaller than the smallest, bigger than the biggest. So I'm going to go 6 to 12. Okay. And again, that doesn't have to be exactly the same for all of us, as long as we have something smaller than the smallest, bigger than the biggest in both directions. And we hit graph, we can see that we have the scatter plot as such. Okay. Now, we can certainly write an equation by hand, okay, like we talked about, okay, using the point and a slope. Okay, but I also want to show you that instead of doing 2 points and just finding one that way, okay, we can find a better line that goes through all these points, and that's what we call a regression line, or a line of best fit. Okay, to do that, what we need to do is go stat again. Okay, and remember, keep in mind this is all on video right now too, so if you forget any of these steps, you can go back and watch again. Okay, so calc. So notice I hit stat. Instead of going to edit, I'm going to move that over to calc, and I'm going to use linear regression because I want to make a line equation for these points. Okay. And as long as your data is in list 1 and list 2, all you got to do is just hit enter at this point. Okay. And it'll give you a slope and a y-intercept. So I'm going to write those down. Y equals 0.483 x plus 7.943. Notice I round to the nearest thousandth. If it doesn't say otherwise, always round to the nearest thousandth in this class. So 3 decimal places unless it says otherwise. And once we have the equation, okay, that is the line of best fit, we can go ahead and put it in our y equals 0.483x plus 7.943. And if we hit graph again, okay, we can see a line that goes through those points very nicely. Okay, and so we can use this line ultimately to make predictions. Okay. All right, let's go back to the predictions part. They asked us to use the equation to estimate the income in 2005. And here's the best way to do that. Go ahead and go to your table set. Make sure it's on auto. Go to your table. And then type in, I want 2005. Remember, our starting year is 2002. So I will want to type in as a 3. And so there's my disposable income prediction for 2005 because that's 3 years past 2002. If I want to do it for 2010, that would be 8 years past 2002. So I'll just type in an 8. And there's my line's prediction for 2008. Or 2010, I should say. 8 years after 2002. Okay. And the last part, it just told us to put the linear equation on the graph of the scatter plot. We did that already. But ultimately, with this line that we created, we can make predictions for whatever year we want to. Okay. And like I said, that's something that's very important in math for in terms of us using real math in real life. Okay. Okay.